Hi, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Museum Extended, for the invitation. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but hopefully the presentation today will be inspiring for you all nonetheless. I'm Anna Carabelea. I'm in charge of communication for the project I'm about to present to you, Doors Digital Incubator for Museum. Now, DOORS is a project that was funded by the European Commission through the Horizon 2020 program, and it was initiated, as it was mentioned before, I think by Ars Electronica, Ecsite, and Museum Booster. And what I will try to do in this presentation is give you a bit of an insight into what we're trying to do with the project, and most importantly, share with you some of the learnings so far that came out of this project. So our aim was with DOORS is to start bridging that digitalization gap between large museums and cultural institutions and small and medium-sized museums that, as we all know, are often a bit left behind in this fast-paced environment. So this gap is generally due to lack of financial and staff resources, but these causes have ripple effects and spill into other areas that might not be as visible, but that then perpetuate and even widen this gap, whether it's the digital competence of practitioners working in these museums or a type of mindset present within these teams, a type of organizational structure that often are in the way of the institutions reaching digital maturity. So the question that we're trying to answer is how can museums develop digital strategies to adapt and reinvent themselves, to strengthen their performance and reach their audiences, perhaps develop new ones and ensure financial recovery and sustainability. And now, while we all know that these are issues that were particularly highlighted during the pandemic, I believe we also know that they didn't come with the pandemic and therefore will not be going away with it either. So I don't want to make this sound hopeless, because after having run the project for almost a year now, or over a year, I can assure you the situation is not, because what the pandemic did, it was also contribute to attitudes towards digitalization changing. And this change then drives further change. So DOORS wants to exploit this moment and focuses on what museums can do to better prepare themselves for a sustainable digital transformation. And the focus on sustainability is something that runs through and is echoed by all the layers of activity that we are running indoors. So I'll tell you a bit about how we're trying to do this, how we're addressing sustainability. We started with an assessment of the sector to see what is out there, what's the status quo, and to that we added an incubation program that addresses small and medium-sized institutions and supports them in implementing digital pilots. And last but not least, we're trying to activate a European network because we really believe collaboration is the way to go about addressing some of these issues. I'll tell you a bit about how we're going about each of these layers of activities that we're doing. So the assessment, we started with a research, and even though we had our suppositions about the landscape and a fairly good understanding of it based on the previous knowledge and expertise that we gathered from our own activities as consortium partners, we thought it was a good opportunity to analyze the landscape into more detail, also because the pandemic had brought a shift. So we did quantitative research with an in-depth survey that targeted museum practitioners working in small and medium-sized institutions that covered a lot of the aspects that were essential to implementing digital pilots. And then secondly, we did extensive interviews with museums and other organizations from the private sector that have been involved in developing and implementing digital pilots with or without success. And I think this is important to mention because we define success in rather broader sense. That wasn't just economic success. It wasn't just projects that had run for a very long time, but it was also projects that actually sparked inspiration within those organizations and brought about learnings that were valuable for other projects or for a future transformation. So we had a lot of learnings that we then compiled in what we call the Sparkle Report, which is a wonderful resource, and I encourage you to go to our website and look it up, because it contains all of these what we call Sparkle cases that are the results of extensive interviews I was mentioning before. We drew the conclusions in a needs assessment report that is also to be found on our website. And finally, we developed a self-reflection tool. The first iteration of this self-reflection tool was already tried and tested by the cohort of museums that were involved in the first stage of the incubation program. And with the input from that, with the feedback that we got, we're currently redeveloping it and will eventually make it public and available for the sector to use. And once this is out in the beginning of December, you can use it within your organizations to try to better understand what are the obstacles, what are the enablers within your individual context. It's important to mention that this tool does not give verdicts on digital maturity levels of the institution, nor does it prescribe paths or courses of action. But instead, what it tries to do is open an honest conversation about what is possible right now in a context of a particular institution, help you identify the blockers and what could be possible if these blockers were removed. So it's really a self-reflection exercise that encourages teams to look at the substratum of their organization and understand the specific blockers, whether it's mindset, whether it's the relation to audience, the content production, the revenue models. And it's not giving you solutions, because we all know that it's not a case of one-size-fits-all solutions. But what instead it will try to do is help you find solutions on your own. So this assessment part not only resulted in these wonderful resources that I've presented here, which you can all find on our website, but also informed the incubation program. The first stage of the incubation program already took place from April to June of this year. And we are now in the exciting phase of selecting from the 40 museums that we had in the first phase of the incubation program, 20 that will be able to then develop their pilot projects and implement their pilot projects for the next 9 months. The overarching goal of the incubation program is obviously to support small and medium-sized museums in their digital transformation journeys. But again, we wanted to focus on sustainability because although we're supporting and funding the implementation of individual projects throughout this process, we try to answer the question of how this particular pilot can be made part and parcel of the museum's overall strategy to ensure that digital becomes inscribed in the DNA of the organization, and this project is continued and can be easily continued even beyond the time frame of doors. So we started looking at first creating or developing a common language, because we all know there's a growing acceptance of the potential of digital, but there's also a lack of a common vocabulary and perhaps even a common understanding of digital. Further, we looked at trying to understand better the enablers and the blockers within organizations that go beyond just the funding, which we all know is an issue. We moved on to understanding and diversifying audiences. So understanding audiences to be able to respond better to existing audiences and their ever-changing demands, but also to develop new audiences. And finally, we focused on matchmaking DSPs, which are digital solution providers, with museums and pilots, so that we create a better understanding on both sides of what is needed to implement digital pilots within cultural institutions. Again, the way we approached these topics was not in a prescriptive way, offering solutions, but rather we focused on capacity building, equipping the museum practitioners with the tools that they need to make these projects into sustainable transformation, because we believe that we can only achieve sustainability by focusing on the people working on the projects and the structure of the organizations within which these projects are implemented. And this is especially relevant, I believe, in a field where most museum practitioners perceive their digital skills as being underdeveloped. This is something that came out of our survey, and it's just another manifestation of that gap that I was talking about earlier. it's a ramification of that. And therefore, we believe it's important that not just us, but also future programs acknowledge that and focus on that as well. In the second part of the incubation program, we focus on actually helping the museums build the prototype. And we will do that through focusing on relevant content that includes new business models. We identify that as a gap in knowledge. And we want to focus on that as well as other topics that came out as needed. We will then support them with individual mentoring, because at this stage we believe it's important that they get advice that is specific to their own pilot project. And then we will focus on peer-to-peer feedback and the collaboration with the digital solution providers and creating the frameworks for those things to happen. And these last 2 points actually bring me to the last point that I want to address, which is the activation of the European network. I've already mentioned the collaboration with the digital solution providers that we're encouraging within the incubation program. And this is a stage that is where it's much needed for museums to understand what technologies are out there, what type of technologies are best suited for their context, but also actually get help in implementing their digital pilots. But this is not the only element, actually. The networking element has been built into the fabric of the project from the start. And this is what we call the project's orbit. And the project's orbit is made up of various experts and museum professionals that have different roles. So the advisory board members have a strategic role in the project and have helped us make important decisions on the design of the incubation program. The jury members assessed the pilots with sustainability in mind and selected those pilots that they thought would have more impact in the organization. The digital solution providers that are essential to starting the dialogue with other sectors as well, and not just in the implementation of this particular pilot projects. And last but not least, the mentors involved in the incubation program and workshop facilitators who have been so kind to share their knowledge with the museum so far and will continue doing so in the second part of the incubation program. But beyond having all these great people around us, we also wanted to create the framework in which museums can work together and exchange knowledge and expertise, not just with experts, but amongst themselves as well. So we've set up peer-to-peer session scheme in which museums can give feedback to one another, and sessions with the digital solution providers in which museums can get a better understanding of the feasibility and sustainability of their projects, because we believe this is one of the main contributions the doors can make to the sector. And one of the main aims that we have with the project is to create an environment that is collaborative rather than competitive. So for us, it made sense to kick off that conversation. And it was also confirmed in a lot of the responses that we got to the surveys, where most museum practitioners saw the main benefit of doors, that of introducing collaboration culture and facilitating them learning from the practices of other institutions. So museum practitioners seem to be aware of the importance of collaboration, and it was just about creating the frameworks in which that can happen. And this is then what we try to do within the incubation program as well, and through the activation of the European network. And to end with, I would like to leave you with a couple of key learnings from this project so far that might help you understand how to approach change in your own institutions. First one is technology and context. A technology-driven approach risks leading to technology-only reforms. And so instead of looking at technology as an appendix that is sort of outside that organization and just being attached to it, we need to embed it within the fabric of the organization. It needs to be built into the DNA of the institution for it to function as an enabler from the inside rather than a driver of that context from the outside. And this will allow museums to start from their goal, their mission, their ethos, and stay true to that, and then see which technologies could best serve that, rather than technology driving that context. And it will also allow for more flexibility in terms of small-scale experimentation, agile iterations, and take manageable risks, because we don't encourage you to jump to the hottest, newest, most exciting technology. That's often, it's perhaps not the best solution for your context. Instead, it's looking at the context and figuring out, okay, what is it that from this that I can use to my benefit? Second of all is capacity building. The digital divide starts from a lack of funding, but it expands beyond that and reproduces itself, as I was saying before. And it is a gap between, not just between institutions, but between the people working in them. So this is why capacity building is probably one of the most important elements of any program that aims to bridge this gap. And this is why we insisted on it in the first stage of the incubation program, on preparing the museum practitioners, the humans working in these institutions, because they are our best bet to make the transformation sustainable in the long run. And they are essential to any of these pilots that we're funding right now, continuing beyond the time frame of projects like Doors. And so instead of focusing on the technology side of the implementation, we wanted to focus on those that make that implementation possible. Because by supporting the teams in acquiring new skills, we also spark change at an organizational level and create spaces for sometimes maybe uncomfortable conversation to take place about what needs to change, and frameworks for that nurture confidence and eventually help practitioners build up that digital courage that is so needed. The myth that the museum sector is resistant to change has been debunked. I can confirm that from having worked with wonderful practitioners that are excited and curious and very motivated. However, at an organizational level, there's still probably a lack of digital confidence, and as a result, a lack of digital courage. So while acknowledging that a long-term transformation is dependent on funding schemes, we believe it's important for museum professionals to also be empowered and get a sense that there's something that they could do to create that change. And last but definitely not least is something that I keep coming back to: collaboration versus competition. Seek for partnerships, collaborations, approach fellow practitioners, talk to them about their projects, try to translate what they've done to your own context. Because being able to ask for help and collaborate with others and take from other people's learnings is also an act of digital courage at the end of the day. And again, this is why we insist a lot on the activation of the European network, but also include within that partners from the private sector that help museums actually implement that. Because at the end of the day, embracing a growth mentality is not just about the eagerness or the motivation to further develop, but also about the ability to recognize that you might not yet be there, and that's fine, that you can ask for help and learn from others. And I will leave you on that note. If you have any questions about the project, or you want to get in touch with us, or you want to keep up to date, you've got our details there. The resources I've talked about in the beginning of the presentation can be found on our website in the library section. You can email us at the email address there, or follow us on social media if you want updates about the project. Thank you so much, and hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day.